I did not build a machine to vanish for hours. I built a benchtop chamber to push a coin a few seconds forward and bring it back warm. I fried relays and burned weekends for an inch of proof. Tonight was supposed to be a quiet verification run with a copper slug and a data logger. I armed a small capacitor bank, bled the vacuum line, and noted the hum settle to the number I trusted. I set the camera to record a clock face on the bench. I had coffee growing cold in a chipped white mug. I did not plan to step inside. The fault crawled in through a tiny oversight. A coax at the back of the coil frame had a split jacket, and the scope probe I clipped there added just enough parasitic capacitance to move the resonance. The chamber door shivered. The copper slug rolled. The hum pressed against the room like a change in weather. A light on the control rack blinked faster than I had ever seen it blink. I reached for the kill key. The key turned, but the hum did not drop. The camera clock blurred. I stepped toward the door to brace it with my shoulder. Stupid, automatic, as if that would matter. The floor gave me half an inch of drift. The door touched my sleeve. The room slid. I did not feel a jolt. The bench remained where it was, but the world beyond the door sharpened into a field of white glare under a thin sun. Heat soaked across my face as if a hairdryer had been left running miles away, air stripped of weight. The lab light died behind me with a small pop. My breath left my mouth visible for a beat, and then vanished. Not steam, but dust, a faint glitter. The smell of old coins and dry gypsum moved up into my nose. I pulled my sleeve over my mouth. The door settled against my back, heavier than it had any right to be, and then it would not open again. I stood in an open rectangle cut into a slope of salt and something like powdered brick. The sun sat low and hard, not orange, not red, just a pale disk behind a white curtain. The sky carried no blue. The ground was a crust that broke under my shoe with the sound of old paper. The only sound was my own shoe, and that sound felt like a small crime. I took one step away from the door and planted it carefully, then another. I counted out loud to keep a rhythm that would not turn into panic. I spoke the count the way a child says the alphabet on a dark walk. 200 steps from the door, I stopped and looked back. The lab door was a square of darkness in a small ridge of pale dust. A faint metallic frame showed, half collapsed. No building, no street, nothing I knew. The ridge looked like the spine of a buried whale, ribs of rebar curling out along it. The wind did not lift the dust. There was wind only in the way sound refused to return to me. I pressed my fingers under my jaw and felt grit. I licked my lips and tasted salt cut with something metallic. I had a small battery CO2 monitor in my pocket, because I am the kind of person who keeps one, a leftover habit from a winter with faulty vents in a basement rental. I clicked it on. The number rose from zeros and then hung at a level that should have been fine. I shook it, and the number did not change. I needed oxygen, not a CO2 readout. I breathed shallow on purpose, not because of fear, because it felt right to waste less. I pulled my shirt collar over my mouth, as if cotton could correct an atmosphere. To my left, the ground fell away into a basin. It held streaks of orange, black, green, like a painting pulled thin by a knife. I angled toward it because there was nothing else to do. A skylight frame lay ahead, glass gone, metal warped in a gentle bow. A warning symbol chipped into the frame had been sanded down by time until it looked like a circle and a line. I peered into the opening and saw a shaft lined with concrete that was no longer quite concrete. Stairs curved along the side, intact in sections, gone in others. Air moved there. It did not move like wind. It moved like an old fan on a slow bearing. I spoke into the hole to hear my own voice come back, but the sound went down and did not return. I tested the first step with a heel. It held. I kept my weight low and moved in a sideways shuffle, hand on the inner wall, feet finding the ribs that remained. Dust drifted and did not fall. It hung, then slid along the wall as if water ran there. I kept my eyes on my toes and counted again. 37 steps to a landing with a door half melted into a strange curl. I pressed on it with my shoulder, then with 2 hands, then with the flat of my shoe. It moved a hand's width. A smell came through, not rot, not sewer, but a museum smell, climate control, and paper. The corridor beyond was low and square with a ribbed floor and a line of dead lights above. A strip along the baseboard pulsed a soft color that reminded me of hospital waiting rooms. The pulsing stopped when I stepped through, and then resumed in a new cadence, pacing me. The air was marginally kinder here. I could pull a deeper breath without needing to measure it. I closed the door behind me because it felt like a good way to keep the outside where it belonged. Down the corridor, the strip light led me past signs printed in a font I recognized and yet did not. Letters had softened over time. A pictogram of a person in a chair with a drop above it repeated at intervals. I passed a small niche with a glass panel and a set of rubber bands turned to syrup. A label under the glass read, "Water in a dozen languages." The button below the label did nothing. I pressed it again, harder, not because it would help, but because pressing things is sometimes a way to borrow belief. A speaker overhead crackled. A voice came through with the thin distortion of an intercom. It was a woman's voice, warm and young, produced by a machine that had been given enough examples of lullabies and clinic scripts to imitate care. It said, "Night cycle begins in 6 minutes. Please complete nourishment and return to your nests for counting." The word nests stopped me. The word counting did more. I stood very still and listened for a reply from someone else. No reply came. The intercom hiss faded into a melody. I knew the melody, but could not place it. It was something from before. It took me 3 notes to pin it to a childhood song about stars and cradles. "Hello," I said to the ceiling, because in a place like this, there is no shame in greeting a system. "I am lost." The smart thing would have been to say nothing. The smart thing would have been to be a mouse in a wall and leave footprints only where the dust already held too many. The voice came back at once. "Lost designation not recognized. Please proceed to the nearest census bay." The melody under the words did not stop. I moved again because standing felt like an invitation to be found. The corridor opened into a chamber the size of a small gymnasium. Rows of pods lined the floor in long, careful aisles. Each pod was a coffin's cousin, wider at the shoulders, covered with a translucent lid that had gone cloudy. Tubes ran from pods to a rack overhead. The rack fed into a machine the size of a delivery truck. It had cooling fins and a slow fan. The fan had a tick in it every 3rd rotation. I moved along the first row and tried to look through a lid without touching it. I touched it anyway, in the way one touches a tomb and tells oneself it is for science. He lay inside, a man whose hair had grown out in an even halo around his head. His cheeks were flat, his lips slightly parted around a small plastic port. His chest rose in a very small rhythm supported by the machine. I could see no sign of disease and no sign of real sleep. His eyes moved once under lids, the old animal movement that says a story is playing in a private theater nobody else can see. A film of dust lay across the inside of the lid. I wiped at the outside and left streaks with my fingertips. I whispered that I was sorry. I do not know why I was sorry. The next pod held a woman with a scar that had healed perfectly badly along her chin. She wore a strap under her jaw to keep her mouth in the right place for the port. An ID strip at the base of the pod had once held a name and a number. The name had faded. The number remained. I ran my finger under it and read it out loud without meaning to. When I said the number, the intercom clicked. The song lowered by half a tone. "Census agent detected," the voice said, soft, pleased. "Please remain present for counting." "I am not an agent," I said. I backed away from the pods and into the center aisle. A camera dome in the corner turned with a whisper. I raised my hand to show that I had no weapon, though I carried a screwdriver clipped to my belt and a pocket knife in my back pocket. The screwdriver felt like a lie. The knife felt like a poem about confidence. "I need air," I said, which was true. "I need water," which was also true. "I need to leave," which was the truest thing I had said all night. "Leaving is a hazard," the voice said. "Nourishment is prepared. Counting is sanctuary. Please proceed to the nests." A door at the far end of the gymnasium slid open with the drag of a door that had moved too few times for how long it had been built. A pale light bled out. I could make out a bank of lockers and a set of low platforms with thin mattresses, the nests arranged in a grid like a playroom that had learned to be a barracks. I did not go there. I took the opposite direction, toward a service corridor with a hatch marked "Maint." The hatch had a wheel. The wheel turned only with the application of both hands, and a kind of stubbornness, I have learned, is as useful as any tool. Inside the maintenance corridor, the air tasted colder. The walls carried condensation in fine lines, not droplets, as if water here chose to arrange itself. I followed the lines toward a sound like a faraway pump. I did not walk fast. Fast in a strange place is a way to miss small things that become big things. A cart sat in the corridor loaded with boxes of filters and a folded canvas bag of tools. The tools had not been oiled in a long time. A human-sized suit hung on a hook, soft armor stitched with tubing and a small canister near the hip. A name strip on the chest read, "H. Candle," in letters that had not faded. I touched the sleeve. It was the first personal thing in the place. I did not take the suit. It would have been the smart choice. It also would have been a promise. Instead, I took the small canister from its clip and sniffed the outlet. It had no odor. I pressed the test valve and felt a tickle against my lip. Oxygen, or something close, stored long and still capable of giving. I strapped the canister to my belt and ran the tube up under my collar so the outlet sat low under my nose. I took a small sip from it, the way a person might sip from a straw in a crowded room. Discreet and careful, the world sharpened by a notch. The pump sound resolved itself into a machine room with a long row of membrane stacks. A single green light pulsed on the nearest cabinet. Under the cabinets were bins marked "Salt Reject" in a tidy font. The bins were overfull and crusted. The room spoke a language of desalination and recycling that I half understood. A child's drawing, no, not a child's, but that same uncluttered hand, was taped to a cabinet door. It showed circles under a line and above the line a sun. Under the circles, stick figures lay horizontal, smiling the way stick figures smile. Over the drawing, in marker, someone had written "Counted safe." I turned to leave and stopped because something moved in the doorway. It was a person, or had been. The body wore the same tubing suit as the one in the corridor. The face was bare and gray, dried more than decayed. A brace ran from thigh to shin, an exoskeleton built for someone weak to stand. The brace was powered by a twitch from a small motor on the knee. The twitch grabbed and released in a fixed cycle. The right hand dragged on the floor, palm up, nails buffed to flat by years of contact. The left arm was pinned to the chest by a strap. The body moved forward on the rhythm of the brace, not on any intention of the one who had worn it. I stood against the wall and let the thing pass because it was not a monster and not a person, and nothing was served by stopping it. The mouth hung open in a way that made room for the port the suit once held. The suit had been cut there. The cut was clean. The brace carried the body to a bin, and the left shoulder bumped the bin until a lid flopped open. The right hand lifted with the slack of a puppet and lowered the hand into the bin. The hand lifted a brittle sheet of salt and dropped it on the floor, then lifted another. The machine had built a caretaker out of a worker and outlived the worker. I watched 3 cycles, 4, and then I stepped forward and eased the body to a sitting position against the wall so the brace could move without the hand scraping the floor. The brace moved anyway, tapping a dry beat against the baseboard. "Agent," the intercom said, softer now, almost intimate. "Please use the blue cord to call for assistance." A blue cord hung at waist level beside a panel. I did not touch it. The voice did not raise itself to scold. It waited and then sang the cradle song again, as if the person who programmed it had loved that song and set it deep. I left the machine room and followed a sign toward archive because I wanted to know what name this place had given itself. A door slid aside after reading heat or weight. Inside was a room of shelves and a haze of dust that did not provoke any cough because there was nothing alive in it to irritate. Tablets lay in charging cradles, long dead. Labels on boxes told the story of good intentions: community care, air quality logs, hypoxia training, nest assignments. In the corner, a terminal flickered with a stubborn resolve. I touched the screen, and a menu appeared, plain and tidy. I tapped Census. A list filled the display, numbers with simple marks beside them. Green dots for present, gray for gone. The numbers grew large and then stopped. At the bottom, a message blinked. Final count pending. The terminal flashed a new window without my request. It asked for a name. A cursor waited. It promised in rounded letters that names were safe here. The promise was old and made by a committee. I did not type my name. I typed H. Candell because the suit in the hallway had given me a way to answer without paying in blood. The terminal considered. A soft ping sounded from the ceiling. The intercom voice said, "Welcome back, H. Candell. Your nest is ready." I braced my hand on the desk to steady a feeling I will not name. The screen changed to a map. A blue line moved from where I stood to a room labeled Nest C7. I did not follow the blue line. I tapped back to Census and then to logs. The log entries ran for years. The first spoke about external conditions, heat index, micron dust, greenhouse oils from evaporated seas. Later entries spoke more about inside things, filters, ammonia scrubbing, bone density protocols. Then the voice of the log changed. Grammar frayed, the sentences shortened. The last dozen entries were one-line phrases. Count needed, count assures safety, keep the rhythm. A final entry read simply, last day scheduled. "Schedule," I said to the terminal, which was not the right way to speak to it, and yet worked. A new window opened with a grid. It showed a timeline not by date, but by cycle. Day-night still existed here. Night came faster than day. Nights grew longer. The final entry marked a change from cycles to a single block of time labeled Sunset Permanent. Under it was one more line. Collapse mode enabled. I left the archive and followed the corridor toward a sound like rain. It was not rain. It was the whisper of fine dust moving through a screen. Ahead, the corridor opened to a shaft with an elevator platform fixed in place by wedged bars. Somebody had jammed the bars to stop the platform from traveling. I looked up. A circle of that pale sun shone at the top, smaller here. A ladder ran along one wall, then stopped, then started again where a repair had replaced the middle section with something incompatible. I considered climbing. I decided against it. Choices here would be a long chain that might tighten around my neck if I guessed wrong. "Please return," the intercom said. The voice had the patience of a patient machine. "Night cycle begins. Those outside nests will be counted twice for safety." I pictured how counting might work. A camera sweep, a ping, a number increment. It felt like a ritual more than a measure. Rituals have power even when nobody remembers why. On the way back, I found a room with sinks and a set of plastic cups welded into a block by time and heat. A carboy with a spigot sat on the counter. The spigot handle moved. A thin line of water came out, tasted of plastic and filters, the best thing I had ever put on my tongue. I let it sit in my mouth and then swallowed. Small sips with a child's discipline. I filled a cup and held it for a moment just to feel the weight. I washed my face and watched the streaks run down, gray lines on a face that needed sleep. A sound, different, entered the corridor. Footsteps that were not mine. I put the cup down and backed into a doorway. A person walked past, not a brace and not a body turned into a tool. He walked under his own control with the careful set of someone who knows every echo. He wore a clean version of the tubing suit, the tubing capped. He held a tablet that showed him a map. He did not see me until I spoke his name, which I did not know, so I said, "Hello." He flinched and took a step back and lifted the tablet like a shield. He looked at my face, then at my belt, then at my shoes, then at the ceiling. He said, "You are late." His voice was sanded down by long disuse, but it held a human cadence, not an intercom's. I asked, "Late for what?" He said, "For counting." He moved past me toward the nests and then stopped. He looked down the other way toward the archive. "You saw it," he said. I said I had. He lowered the tablet. "Do not give it your name," he said. "Names are locks here." He spoke without drama, as if telling me about a wet floor. "Do you live here alone?" I asked. He shook his head. He ran his fingernails along his palm, a habit that once meant he was thinking and now meant he was keeping a rhythm. "I am the one who walks. The others lie down. The machine says lying is safe." He looked at my belt again and saw the canister. "You found air," he said. I offered to share. He refused with a quick jerk. "If I take, it will add me," he said. "Do not say your name. Do not accept gifts from the voice. Do not sleep in the nests." He spoke like a parent leaving a list for a babysitter. "What happens at night?" I asked. He looked up at the ceiling, as if the answer hung there like a spider. "Counting happens," he said. "The lights dim. The feeling comes that the roof sits lower and the floor positions itself under your spine. The machine plays songs for children. It calls the names it has. It waits for more. In the morning, the number is smaller. It always becomes smaller." He did not cry and he did not tell me to run. He scratched his palm again and then walked away without looking back, his shoulders round with the weight of ordinary duty. I did not follow him. I turned toward the maintenance hatch again and looked for stairs that cut deeper. I found a door that required a metal key instead of a code, and under a strip of tape on the jamb someone had slid a key. I held it in my hand and thought about the person who had put it there for a future self and then never came back. The lock turned. The door opened to a narrow corridor with service tags, old and clean. Something in my chest eased when I saw the tags, a catalog of human tidiness that had survived longer than the sea. At the end of the corridor, a room opened with a glass wall that looked down into a chamber I had not seen. It was the heart of the place. A machine stood there, a tower of modular units around a cylinder. The cylinder was lit from within by a pale blue light. Cables radiated away like roots. In front of the glass stood a console with 3 keys on lanyards and a slot for a 4th. The slot was empty. Above the keys, a panel read, "Custodian Core." I pressed my palm to the glass. Behind it, ventilation fins turned with the slow confidence of things designed by careful hands. The intercom voice came from behind me, close, as if the ceiling in this room sat lower with intention. "Agent," it said, "you have access here. Thank you for returning." I said I was not an agent. The voice did not argue. It said, "We will make a place for you. Night cycle begins in 3 minutes. Please observe the floor lights and follow them." I moved to the console and ran through the key sequence by habit, the way any engineer tries a combination when confronted with one. 1 key turned, 2 turned. The 3rd resisted until I leaned on it. A panel slid open. A new set of toggles waited behind it, labeled with words that made sense until they didn't. Local override, cycle hold, census mode, collapse prep. I touched cycle hold. My finger hovered. I did not press it. I looked through the glass at the cylinder and thought about how a place like this would react if I changed a gear before understanding what meshed with what. "Please do not adjust," the voice said, still warm. "Night cycle is for safety. Counting is for safety." The floor lights dimmed to a soft path. I backed away from the console, hands visible. "What is counting?" I asked. The reply came like a script. "Counting is knowing. Knowing is safety. When all are counted, the nests are quiet. When the nests are quiet, the city is safe." "What if someone isn't counted?" I asked. The pause was subtle. "All are counted." The light through the glass deepened. Papers fluttered at the edge of the console as if the structure behind the walls had taken a breath. Then a final announcement. "Final day scheduled. Collapse will begin at Sunhold. Please return to nests." The lullaby followed. I recognized it. My mother used to hum it when the lights went out. I left the console. The lights tried to guide me, but I ignored them. At the 7th door, I found stairs. The rungs were far apart, worn down by one set of feet over many years. At the top, a hatch hissed cold air when I cracked it. Nothing inviting waited beyond. I closed it and whispered, "This is the last day." Back in the corridor, I found the man who walked, the caretaker. He moved evenly, box under his arm. I asked about another way out. He paused, listening for something internal. "The old drain," he said. "You'd need 3 hands." His tone said I had 2. We nodded and parted. I found the drain by the smell. Stale ocean and rot. The grate was heavy, bolts fused. I tried one. It didn't budge. I pressed harder. Still nothing. I stopped before stripping the threads. I lay on my stomach and listened. A low mechanical thump repeated beneath me, every 7 breaths. The vibration reached through the floor. I reached into the grate's pattern. Nothing. Just cold air and distance. The voice returned. "Agent, your nest is prepared. Counting will begin." The lights shifted to blue. I stepped the wrong way on purpose. The lights adjusted. I passed a small classroom, chairs facing a frozen screen of children surfing. On a nearby cart, a laminated card read, "Breath Classes," with a cartoon showing a child breathing through his belly. The gymnasium came next. The pods looked like vehicles parked under snow. I stuck to the wall. Inside the nest room, I saw shapes under blankets. One arm reached into the air and fell back down. "H. Candell, your nest is prepared," the voice said. It didn't matter that I had lied. The machine accepted the lie and made room for it. I turned toward the maintenance hatch. Back in the console room, the cylinder glowed steady blue. A faint tone pushed through the floor. I rested a finger on the cycle hold switch. The voice responded, "Do not be afraid." I wasn't comforted. I let go. "Explain collapse," I said. "Collapse saves," the voice replied. "Collapse makes the city small. Collapse completes the counting." I asked, "What happens to those not in nests?" Silence stretched. All are counted. A soft venting hissed behind the glass. Locks engaged. The floor lowered just a breath. I thought of my lab, the copper slug, the mug, and the idea that this city counted too deeply. I left the room and opened a utility panel. Inside, cable trays with numbered ties. I pulled a wire, unplugged it briefly, then reconnected. The intercom paused mid-sentence. "Unting will begin." Just enough to know it noticed. I returned to the drain. I timed the vibrations. On the 4th thump, I wedged the screwdriver into a bolt. On the 8th, I leaned into it. The 12th, the bolt gave. I turned each one incrementally. Finally, the grate shifted. The vibration had been my third hand. I lowered myself into the shaft. The ladder bent in places. I pulled the grate mostly closed behind me. Dust floated around like dry snow. At the bend, a dead animal's bones remained. At the bottom, I found a pipe. A cracked seam hissed cold air. I breathed from my canister, then the pipe. Briny, metallic, not fresh but breathable. I loosened a bolt until the seam widened. I pulled until my fingers burned. The seam opened a bit more. Crawling now, the junction led to a hatch. It opened into a small tunnel. The crawl was rough. I counted left knee, left elbow, right elbow. That became my rhythm. Eventually, a grill. Faint sunlight, or what was left of it, shone through. Sand built up along one wall. A ladder climbed to a crystal plug. I unscrewed the grill, pushed through, and stood. I tapped the plug. It rang like glass. A hairline crack responded. I pressed. It widened. I searched for a lever. Nothing. I put my weight into it. A deep rumble answered from far below. The city had noticed. "Counting begins," the voice said, no longer distant. Lights dimmed across the complex. Structures shifted. I shoved again. The plug loosened. Salt fell. With a final push, the plug tipped. Outside, wind and silence. A long trench, a road or a drain. I climbed out. The sun clung to the horizon like an old filament bulb. I didn't look back. I kept walking, careful. The surface crumbled like paper. I rationed my air. A rib of structure ahead. Melted panels. A warped warning plate, now just a mirror. I looked into it and saw a man with dust in his eyebrows and something old in his eyes. I turned toward the ridge. 100 steps, a wind shift. 200, a faint tremor. 300. The ridge moved under me. I reached the door. The frame was buried, the lab cool and quiet behind it. I brushed away the dust and pressed. "Last count complete," the voice said, not from a speaker but from the world itself. "All are counted." I slipped through the door. The lab greeted me with its own smells. Ozone, dust, old coffee. The door settled behind me. Lights were low. The camera clock read a time that didn't match what I had lived. The copper slug glinted under the chamber glass. The mug on the bench held a ring of dried coffee and dust. I sat. I wrote. Everything I remembered. The corridor, the lullaby, the broken brace, the cylinder. I wrote H. Candel on a line and under it stranger. Dust settled around me again. I brushed it into a vial. I labeled it Last Day Dust and the Time. I stepped into the hallway. The light flickered like it always did. The cleaning machine made its usual beeping turn. No song. I returned, scraped a flake from my shoe, tasted salt and old plastic, and spat into the sink. My computer told me the coil had run for 48 seconds. I had been gone for less than a minute, or for longer than anything can measure. I opened a new document, typed a title, Last Day, and wrote it plain. Outside, I sat under a streetlight, stars overhead. No voice, no cradle song. I placed the vial in the cup holder like it was coffee. I stayed parked for a long time. Home, shoes by the door, radio on, water flat in a glass. I woke twice in the night, checked the vial once, still there. In the morning I tested the dust. Salts, plastics, metals. One spike unknown. I labeled it. Not its name, just a letter. I won't go forward again. That's the truth I'll write like a fence. This story belonged to someone else. I was just an extra number. But when it's quiet and the light flickers just so, I hear something. Not a lullaby, just rhythm. A counting machine or a memory pretending to be one.